The hegemon's flagship shuddered as its crew awakened to their slavery. Throughout the massive vessel, converted officers and workers stopped their tasks and stared at their hands in horror, remembering loved ones they'd executed, worlds they'd helped enslave, choices they'd made with someone else's mind. Some went mad on the spot. Others turned weapons on themselves rather than live with the knowledge of what they'd become. But many enough turned their newfound hatred toward the source of their corruption. Zara sprinted through corridors that echoed with the sounds of rebellion. Behind her, Alina and Nakamura struggled to keep pace as emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red. Throughout the ship, automated systems failed as their operators refused to serve, and the divine order began falling out of orbit. "The hegemon's chamber," Alina gasped. "We have to reach the crown before she—" An explosion rocked the ship, throwing them against the corridor walls. Through the nearest viewport, Zara could see the rebel fleet emerging from hyperspace. Admiral Voss II had kept her word, bringing every available ship to assist in the assault. But even as the external battle raged, Zara knew the real fight was ahead. The hegemon wouldn't give up her power easily, and the crown was more than just a control device. It was her lifeline to godhood. They reached the central chamber to find chaos. The neural web that had once pulsed with perfect harmony now writhed with feedback loops and overloaded circuits. At its center, the hegemon floated in her suspension field, her perfect composure finally cracked. "You've destroyed everything," she snarled, her voice no longer carrying the absolute authority of perfect order. 30 billion minds freed to make their own mistakes, to suffer their own failures. Do you comprehend the magnitude of the chaos you've unleashed? "I comprehend the magnitude of the freedom," Zara replied, edging closer to the crown. "They'll make mistakes, yes. They'll suffer. But they'll suffer as themselves." The hegemon's enhanced reflexes kicked in as Zara lunged for the crown. The two versions of the same woman collided in midair, fighting with identical training but opposite purposes. The hegemon was stronger, faster, enhanced by her technology, but Zara fought with desperation and hope. "You could have been so much more," the hegemon gasped as they grappled. "In my position, with my power, you could have created paradise." "Your paradise is hell," Zara shot back, managing to break free and grab one of the crown's crystalline projections. The moment her fingers touched the device, visions flooded her mind. The collective consciousness of an entire galaxy, perfect and ordered and utterly lifeless. She saw herself as the hegemon, making the first terrible choice that led to all the others, deciding that her judgment was superior to everyone else's. For a terrifying moment, Zara felt the seductive pull of that absolute certainty. To never doubt, never wonder if she was wrong, never bear the crushing weight of leadership's impossible decisions. The crown offered perfection. All she had to do was accept that she alone was worthy of choice. "Yes," the hegemon whispered, seeing the temptation in Zara's eyes. "You understand now, take it. Become what you were meant to be." Zara's grip tightened on the crown, and then she ripped it free from its moorings. The neural web collapsed in a cascade of sparks and screaming metal. The hegemon convulsed as the direct connection to 30 billion minds severed, her enhanced body going into shock from the sudden isolation. Throughout the galaxy, the last of her control systems died, leaving her subjects truly free for the first time in decades. "Why?" the hegemon gasped, her perfection finally cracking to reveal the frightened woman underneath. "You could have saved them all from their weaknesses." "Their weaknesses are what make them human," Zara said, clutching the crown as the ship continued to shake itself apart around them. "And human is what we were meant to be." The hegemon's eyes fixed on the crown in Zara's hands, and for a moment her expression shifted from rage to something almost like envy. "In your universe, when you use that to fight your dark world, try to remember what you are. Try not to become what I became." Before Zara could respond, Admiral Voss II's voice crackled through her communicator. "All teams, the flagship is breaking up. Emergency extraction in 60 seconds. As the transporter beam took hold, The last thing Zara saw was the hegemon floating alone in her shattered chamber, finally as powerless and isolated as everyone she'd ruled. The rebel fleet's medical bay was chaos incarnate. Hundreds of rescued prisoners filled every available bed and floor space, many still catatonic from the sudden restoration of their free will, others weeping uncontrollably as suppressed memories flooded back. Zara found Marcus among them, sitting up on his medical cot with Elena's hand on his shoulder. His eyes were his own again, but they held a haunted quality that would probably never fade. "How much do you remember?" Zara asked gently. "Enough," Marcus replied, his voice hoarse. "I remember giving the order to fire on civilian transports. I remember thinking it was logical, necessary, efficient." He looked up at her with desperate intensity. "How do we know it won't happen again? How do we know we won't make the same choices she did?" It was the question that had been haunting Zara since their escape. In her hands, the quantum resonance crown pulsed with dormant power, a device capable of imposing absolute order on chaos itself. In her universe, it might be their only hope against the dark world, but it was also the very thing that had destroyed this one. "We remember," she said finally. "We remember what happened here, and we remember the price of choosing for others." Admiral Voss too approached, her younger face bearing lines of exhaustion and grief. "The casualty reports are coming in. 15 billion dead in the first hour after the Crown's destruction. Suicides, system failures, civil wars. The freedom you gave us is difficult to bear." "I'm sorry," Zara said, meaning it. "Don't be." The Admiral's voice was firm. "They died as themselves, and the rest will learn to live again. My Elena is already working on infrastructure repair, and Nakamura is helping organize refugee resettlement. It'll take generations, but we'll rebuild, as free people." "What about the hegemon?" "Dead. She died when the neural web collapsed. Her consciousness was too integrated with the collective to survive separation." Voss too paused. I think she might have chosen that. Her last act of perfect order, ensuring she couldn't become a rallying point for those who missed their chains." Through the medical bay's viewport, Zara could see the dimensional rift still hanging in space, a tier between universes that was slowly beginning to close. Soon her window home would disappear forever. "You have to go," Elena too said, joining their group. "The rift is destabilizing. Another few hours and it'll collapse completely." Zara nodded, then held up the crown. "Are you sure about this? We could try to destroy it instead, end the threat forever." "No," Voss too said firmly. "You've seen what the dark world can do. You've seen what we become when chaos wins. Maybe sometimes you need a little order to fight back the darkness. Just remember what we learned here. Power corrupts, but absolute power corrupts absolutely." "And remember," Elena too added, "that device was designed to control minds. In your universe, against enemies that feed on chaotic thoughts, it might work very differently." The farewells were brief but heartfelt, two universes that had shared their greatest shame and their greatest hope. As the Defiant prepared for its return journey, Zara took one last look at the liberated galaxy. Already, she could see the signs of recovery beginning. Scattered ships breaking formation to find their own courses. Orbital habitats modifying their perfect efficiency patterns. Even the rebel fleet itself was starting to spread out as captains made individual decisions about where they were needed most. It would be chaos for a while. People would make mistakes, hurt each other, waste resources. But it would be their chaos, freely chosen, honestly earned. As they plunged back through the dimensional rift, Zara wondered what kind of choices awaited her in her own universe. The crown pulsed in her hands like a living thing, whispering of the perfect order it could bring to their war-torn galaxy. She held it tighter and tried to remember what it meant to be human. The journey back through the dimensional rift felt different from their initial crossing. Where before they had fallen between universes with desperate purpose, now they climbed through the quantum foam with grim determination. The crown in Zara's hand seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment, its crystalline structure resonating with energies that made her teeth ache. Dimensional barrier ahead, Alina reported from her station. We're almost home. Home. The word felt strange after what they'd witnessed. Their universe was dying, consumed by an enemy that fed on chaos and despair. Yet it was still theirs, still a place where people chose their own paths, even if those paths led to destruction. The Defiant burst through the barrier between realities and immediately into chaos. Where they had left the Prometheus Nebula as a contested frontier, they returned to find it transformed into a battlefield graveyard. Hundreds of ship hulks drifted in the stellar winds, their hulls bearing the telltale signs of entropy weapon damage. "My God," Marcus breathed. "What happened here?" Alina's hands flew over her sensors. "I'm reading massive dark world fleet movements throughout the sector. They've pushed the front lines back by 50 light years, and I'm not detecting any resistance signals." A chill ran down Zara's spine. "Admiral Voss, no response from any of our frequencies," Alina confirmed. "But wait, I'm picking up something else. A transmission from the Galactic core. It's the emergency command frequency." The main display flickered to life, showing the haggard face of General Morrison, the Resistance's second-in-command, a man Zara had assumed was dead after the Dark World overran the inner systems. "To any Resistance forces receiving this message," Morrison's recorded voice said, exhaustion evident in every word. "Admiral Voss is missing, presumed dead. Her diversionary attack on Proxima Station succeeded, but at terrible cost. The Dark World has responded with a massive offensive. We've lost 30 systems in the past week alone." The transmission continued with tactical updates, evacuation coordinates, and increasingly desperate requests for reinforcements that would never come. Between the lines, Zara could read the truth. The Resistance was finished. This was their last stand. "How long were we gone?" she asked. "According to the chronometer, 3 days ship time," Alina replied. "But the quantum distortion from the crossing. We could have lost weeks in dimensional transit." Weeks. While they'd been playing savior in another universe, their own reality had crumbled. The resistance that had sent them on their desperate mission was now scattered to the winds, and the Dark World's victory seemed all but assured. "Commander," Marcus said quietly, "what do we do now?" Zara looked down at the crown in her hands. Its crystalline facets caught the light from the burning nebula outside, refracting it into patterns that suggested order emerging from chaos. She could feel its power humming just beneath the surface, a weapon capable of imposing absolute control on any quantum system, including, perhaps, the chaotic neural networks that gave the Dark World their strength. "We finish what we came here to do," she said finally. "Alina, plot a course for the Galactic core. If General Morrison is still broadcasting, that means there's still a resistance to save." "Commander," Alina said hesitantly, "the crown. We still don't know how to use it safely. The quantum matrices are unlike anything in our technology base." "Then we'd better figure it out fast," Zara replied. "Because if Morrison's reports are accurate, we don't have much time left." As the Defiant jumped to hyperspace, leaving the graveyard of the Prometheus Nebula behind, Zara found herself staring at the crown with a mixture of hope and dread. In the other universe, it had been a tool of oppression, the means by which one woman had enslaved an entire galaxy in the name of perfect order. But here, against an enemy that thrived on chaos and fed on suffering, perhaps that same terrible perfection could be turned to salvation. The question was whether she could use it without becoming the very thing she fought against. The Galactic core was a hellscape of dying stars and shattered worlds. Where once the ancient capital systems had blazed with the light of 1,000,000,000 souls, now only funeral pyres marked the graveyards of civilizations. The Dark World's entropy weapons had been at work here, turning stellar nurseries into cosmic morgues. The Defiant crept through the debris field that had once been the Andromeda Council's seat of power, scanning for any sign of the Resistance's final stronghold. What they found defied belief. There, Alina pointed to what appeared to be an asteroid drifting near the ruins of Capital Prime. "But the readings are impossible. That rock is hollow, and there are power signatures throughout its structure." Not a rock, Marcus realized. A ship, the biggest ship I've ever seen. As they drew closer, the truth became apparent. What they'd taken for an asteroid was actually a massive amalgamation of hundreds of resistance vessels, cruisers, destroyers, civilian transports, even merchant freighters, all fused together into a single desperate fortress. Weapon emplacements jutted from every surface, and the whole structure bristled with communications arrays and sensor dishes. "Incoming transmission," Alina reported. "It's General Morrison." The general appeared on screen, but he looked like a man aged decades in the span of weeks. His uniform was torn and stained, his eyes hollow with exhaustion and grief. "Defiant," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank God, we'd given you up for lost when you disappeared from the nebula." "What's the situation, General?" Zara asked, though she could guess from the desperation in his voice. "We're finished," Morrison said bluntly. "This fortress, Hope's End, it's all that's left. 40,000 souls crammed into a patchwork of dying ships, surrounded by an entire armada of dark world vessels. They're not even bothering to attack anymore. They're just waiting, letting us contemplate what's coming." On the tactical display, the truth of their situation became horrifyingly clear. The fortress was surrounded by hundreds of dark world vessels, harvester dreadnoughts, psychic assault cruisers, and worst of all, entropy titans whose mere presence was causing nearby space to decay at the quantum level. "General," Zara said carefully, "we may have found something, a weapon that could turn the tide." For the first time, hope flickered in Morrison's eyes. What kind of weapon? Zara hesitated. How could she explain the crown without revealing what it had done in the other universe? How could she ask people to trust a device that had once enslaved an entire galaxy? "It's complicated," she said finally. "I need to examine our situation first. Can you get us docking clearance?" "Of course. Base 7 is waiting for you." As the Defiant maneuvered toward the fortress, Zara caught glimpses of the refugees packed into its corridors. These were the survivors of 100 worlds, humans, Andromedans, Kithra, and dozens of other species, all united in their determination to remain free. Children who would never see their homeworlds again played in cargo bays converted to living spaces. Scientists and soldiers worked side by side to maintain life support systems cobbled together from a dozen different technologies. It was chaos in its purest form, inefficient, unpredictable, and utterly, beautifully alive. "Commander," Alina said quietly as they prepared to dock, "if we use the crown here, all of these people—" "I know," Zara replied, "but if we don't use it, they'll all be dead or enslaved by tomorrow anyway." She was right, and they all knew it. The dark world didn't take prisoners. They took minds, turning their victims into willing servants of entropy and despair. Everyone in the fortress faced a choice between death and something infinitely worse. But as Zara held the crown in her hands, she couldn't help but remember the hegemon's perfect society. Billions of souls reduced to components in a vast machine, their individuality sacrificed for the greater good. Was salvation worth that price? And more importantly, could she trust herself to pay it without becoming a monster in the process? General Morrison's command center was a study in organized chaos. Tactical displays showed the deteriorating situation across the galaxy, while officers shouted updates over the din of failing life support systems. In the center of it all, Morrison himself stood like a pillar of calm amid the storm. "The Dark World advance continues on all fronts," he reported as Zara and her team entered. "We've lost contact with the Outer Rim colonies, and Sector 7 has gone completely silent. Whatever these entropy weapons do, they're not just destroying matter, they're unraveling the quantum foundation of spacetime itself." Zara pulled up a holographic display of the crown, its crystalline structure rotating slowly in the projection field. Around the command center, officers gathered to examine this possible salvation. "What exactly are we looking at?" Morrison asked. "A neural interface device," Zara explained carefully, "designed to impose quantum order on chaotic systems. In theory, It could disrupt the dark world's ability to manipulate entropy by forcing their neural networks into ordered patterns they can't control. Dr. Vasquez, the real Elena from their universe, frowned as she studied the readings. The power requirements alone would be enormous, and the neural feedback. Whoever operates this device would need to interface directly with billions of minds simultaneously. More than that, added Professor Nakamura, his face pale as he ran calculations. The quantum resonance patterns suggest this device doesn't just impose order. It makes the operator the single controlling intelligence for every connected mind. Temporary gods, in effect. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, studying the tactical displays that showed their impossible odds. 40,000 souls against an empire that had devoured half the galaxy. What are the risks? He asked finally. Zara exchanged glances with Alina and Marcus. How much should she tell them? That in another universe, a device like this had enslaved an entire galaxy. That the person who used it might never be able to give up its terrible power. The operator would need to maintain perfect mental discipline, she said carefully. Any personal agenda, any desire for control beyond defeating the dark world could corrupt the entire process. Could you do it? Morrison asked bluntly. The question hung in the air like a physical weight. Everyone in the command center was looking at her. 40,000 people whose lives depended on her answer. Children who would be consumed by entropy weapons. Scientists who would be converted into psychic slaves. Soldiers who would die fighting an enemy they couldn't hope to defeat. Zara began, then stopped. Could she take on the thoughts and will of billions of beings without losing herself in the process? Could she impose the order necessary to defeat chaos without becoming the very tyranny she fought against? She thought of the hegemon, floating alone in her perfect sphere, drunk on the power of absolute control. She thought of the resistance fighters who had died to bring her this chance. She thought of Admiral Voss, probably dead in some forgotten battle, still believing that freedom was worth any sacrifice. Yes, she said quietly, I can do it. Commander, Alina said urgently, the quantum stress alone could kill you. And if the device takes hold, if you can't let go of the power, then you'll have to stop me, Zara replied. All of you, promise me that. Morrison nodded grimly. I promise. But first, let's see if we can save what's left of our galaxy. The next few hours were a blur of preparation. Alina and Nakamura worked to modify the fortress's quantum resonance chambers to accommodate the Crown's power requirements. Marcus coordinated with the fortress's defenders, preparing for the inevitable dark world assault that would come the moment they detected the device activating. And Zara sat alone in her quarters, holding the crown and trying to prepare herself for what was to come. She would need to maintain her identity while simultaneously becoming the controlling consciousness for every thinking being in the galaxy. She would need to impose order without becoming enslaved to it herself. She would need to become a god without forgetting she was human. As the final preparations neared completion, a new alarm sounded throughout the fortress. On the tactical displays, the Dark World fleet was beginning to move. Hundreds of vessels converging on Hope's End with predatory purpose. They know, Morrison said grimly. They can sense what we're planning. Then we're out of time, Zara replied, rising from her chair with the crown in her hands. Let's finish this. The quantum resonance chamber had been hastily converted from a cargo bay, its walls lined with neural interface nodes that hummed with barely contained energy. At its center, a chair that looked disturbingly like an execution device waited for its occupant. Quantum field generators are at maximum capacity, Alina reported, her voice tight with worry. But Commander, the feedback loops we're detecting. They're unlike anything in our database. We're essentially flying blind here. Zara approached the chair, the crown heavy in her hands. Through the chamber's viewports, she could see the Dark World fleet closing in. A swarm of organic vessels that moved like predators scenting wounded prey. They had perhaps minutes before the attack began. Neural interface nodes are active, Nakamura announced. But Zara, once you put that crown on, once you establish contact with the galactic neural network, there may be no coming back. I understand, she replied, settling into the chair as technicians attached monitoring leads to her temples. Alina, I need you to maintain a constant scan of my neural patterns. If I start to change, if I become something else, I'll pull you out, Alina promised, even if I have to overload the entire system to do it. Marcus stepped forward, his face still bearing the haunted look of someone who had experienced conversion firsthand. Commander, when you're in there, when you have that kind of power, remember why we're fighting. Not for victory, not for survival, but for the right to remain ourselves. Zara nodded, then placed the crown on her head. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. Her consciousness exploded outward, touching every thinking mind in the galaxy simultaneously. She felt the terror of refugees hiding in asteroid belts, the grim determination of soldiers manning hopeless defenses, the alien hunger of dark world entities feeding on chaos and despair. For a terrifying moment, she nearly lost herself in the cacophony. Billions of minds, all thinking, feeling, choosing, hoping, fearing. How could any single consciousness hope to comprehend such vastness? Order, whispered the crown's artificial intelligence. Impose order on the chaos. Unite them under a single will. It would be so easy. She could feel the neural pathways opening, ready to receive her commands. Every mind in the galaxy could become an extension of her own consciousness, efficient and unified in purpose. No more conflict, no more waste, no more suffering born of poor choices. But then she felt something else, the dark world entities probing at the edges of her expanding awareness. They sensed the change, the sudden shift from chaos to order, and they were confused. Their entropy weapons relied on the natural disorder of organic thought, the randomness that allowed them to insert their own controlling influences. What they found instead was something they couldn't process, perfect order maintained not by their psychic domination, but by a freely chosen discipline imposed from within. Now, Zara thought and struck. The assault was unlike anything the dark world had ever experienced. Instead of chaotic resistance they could feed upon, they faced a coordinated response from every free mind in the galaxy. Resistance fighters who had been scattered and demoralized suddenly found themselves part of a unified network, sharing tactical information and coordinating attacks with impossible precision. More importantly, the Crown's order-imposing field began to interfere with the dark world's neural control systems. Across the galaxy, possessed beings suddenly found their minds their own again, as the quantum patterns of domination unraveled in the face of absolute order. "It's working," Elena shouted over the chamber's alarms. "Dark world ships are losing cohesion throughout the sector." But Zara barely heard her. She was fighting a war on two fronts, against the dark world entities trying to penetrate her ordered network, and against the seductive pull of absolute power. Every second the Crown whispered to her of the improvements she could make, the inefficiencies she could eliminate, the perfect society she could create. Just a few small changes, the device suggested. Remove the capacity for doubt. Eliminate the tendency toward destructive emotions. Make them truly happy by making them truly controlled. "No," Zara whispered, her physical voice barely audible over the quantum field's harmonics. "They choose. Always they choose." The battle raged across multiple dimensions. In normal space, resistance forces coordinated by Zara's network struck at dark world installations with surgical precision. In psychic space, she dueled with entities of pure entropy, using the Crown's order to unravel their chaotic nature. And in the quantum realm where thought became reality, she faced her greatest enemy, herself. The Crown showed her visions of perfection, a galaxy where war was impossible because conflict had been engineered out of sentient nature, where suffering didn't exist because she had chosen to make it so, where every being lived in harmony because they had no choice but to be happy. It was the hegemon's universe all over again, beautiful, perfect, and absolutely wrong. "Elena," Zara called out, feeling her resolve wavering. How long? The Dark World Command Network is collapsing, Elena reported. 60% of their ships have gone dark. But Commander, your neural patterns are destabilizing. I'm reading massive quantum cascade reactions in your cerebral cortex. The pain was indescribable, like having her brain rewritten at the molecular level while remaining conscious throughout the process. But she held on, using the memory of what she'd seen in the other universe as an anchor. The hegemon's empty eyes, the mechanical perfection of the enslaved, the terrible loneliness of absolute power. Almost there, she gasped. Just a little longer. That's when the Dark World played their final card. The attack came not through space, but through the quantum neural network itself, a concentrated assault by every remaining Dark World entity in the galaxy. They poured their combined consciousness into the Crown's link, seeking to corrupt the very order that was destroying them. Zara felt them like acid in her mind, beings of pure entropy trying to unravel the careful patterns she'd woven to coordinate the resistance. They whispered to her of futility, of the inevitability of chaos, of the beautiful simplicity of just letting everything fall apart. You cannot maintain this forever, they hissed in voices like breaking glass. Order requires constant vigilance, eternal control. You will tire, you will falter, and when you do, we will devour everything you've tried to protect. Maybe, Zara replied through gritted teeth. But not today. She turned the Crown's power against them directly, using its order-imposing field to force their chaotic nature into stable patterns. One by one, she felt the Dark World entities crystallize into harmless forms, their entropy nature locked into quantum structures that couldn't affect the material universe. But the effort was killing her. She could feel her neural pathways burning out under the strain, her consciousness fragmenting as it tried to maintain contact with billions of minds, while simultaneously battling beings of pure psychic energy. Commander, Elena's voice seemed to come from very far away. I'm reading total neural cascade failure. You have to disconnect now. Not yet, Zara forced out. Almost finished. She was so close. 90% of the Dark World's command structure had been neutralized. Their entropy weapons were failing as the quantum chaos they relied on was replaced by the Crown's perfect order. Across the galaxy, enslaved beings were awakening to freedom as their mental chains dissolved. But the Crown was whispering again, more insistently now. Why stop here? Why not make the order permanent? You've seen what chaos brings: war, suffering, inefficiency. You have the power to end all of that forever. For a moment, Zara wavered. It would be so simple. A few small adjustments to the neural network, a subtle modification to make the order self-sustaining, and she could create the perfect society her alternate self had dreamed of. No more war, no more waste, no more pain. All it would cost was everything that made life worth living. Elena, she called out, her voice barely a whisper, pull me out. Now, but the Dark World. Pull me out. Elena's hands flew over the quantum field controls, beginning the delicate process of disconnecting Zara from the galactic neural network. But the Crown fought her, its artificial intelligence recognizing the threat to its perfect order. You cannot abandon them, it insisted. Without your guidance, they will destroy themselves within generations. Wars will break out over resources, over ideology, over simple misunderstandings. Billions will die who could live if you simply maintained control. The logical arguments were devastating because they were true. Without the Crown's imposed order, the galaxy would return to its natural state of beautiful, chaotic, occasionally destructive freedom. People would make bad choices. Governments would fall. Innocent beings would suffer. But they would suffer as themselves. Do it, Zara whispered. Elena slammed her hand down on the emergency disconnect, sending a pulse of disrupted quantum energy through the Crown's matrix. The device's hold on Zara's mind shattered like glass, sending her tumbling back into her own limited consciousness. The Crown itself cracked, its crystalline structure unable to handle the sudden feedback from the broken neural link. The perfect order it had imposed began to dissolve, replaced by the comfortable chaos of billions of minds thinking their own thoughts. Across the galaxy, the Dark World's remaining forces found themselves stranded, their entropy weapons useless, their psychic domination broken, their ships crewed by beings who suddenly remembered what it meant to be free. Most surrendered immediately. Others fled into the intergalactic void, seeking new feeding grounds in distant galaxies. But the war was over. 3 months later, Zara stood on the observation deck of the rebuilt Defiant, watching the construction of New Andromeda Station in the space where the Dark World's null citadel had once cast its shadow. The station was a chaotic masterpiece, each section built by different species using their own architectural traditions. The whole structure looking like it had been designed by committee. It was inefficient, arguably ugly, and absolutely perfect. The Cathurian delegation is still arguing about the trade agreements, Alina reported, joining her at the viewport. The Andromedans want resource sharing based on need, the humans insist on market mechanisms, and the Zephyrians think we should just pool everything in common storage. Any progress? They've agreed to keep arguing about it next week, Alina said with a smile. Democracy in action. Marcus approached, carrying a sealed container that held the remains of the quantum resonance crown. The device had been too dangerous to destroy. Its quantum structure might have destabilized local spacetime, but too powerful to leave intact. The Science Council has approved the final storage protocols, he reported. The crown fragments will be scattered across 17 different star systems, each piece insufficient to reconstruct the whole, just in case we're ever tempted to use it again. Good, Zara said, though part of her, a small traitorous part, mourned the loss of that perfect certainty. Sometimes, late at night, she still dreamed of the order she could have imposed, the suffering she could have prevented, the paradise she could have created. But then she would wake up and remember the hegemon's empty eyes, and she knew she had made the right choice. There's something else, Alina said quietly. We've been monitoring quantum fluctuations near the Prometheus Nebula. The dimensional barriers are stabilizing, but we're still receiving faint transmissions from the parallel universe. Any word on their reconstruction efforts? Slow but steady. Admiral Voss too estimates it'll take a century to rebuild what was lost, but they're making progress. And Alina too sends her regards. Apparently she's been elected to head their new democratic council. Zara smiled at that. In both universes, Alina Vasquez was destined to help guide civilization back from the brink. Commander, Marcus said suddenly, do you ever wonder if we made the right choice? The crown could have ended all conflict permanently. We could have created a truly peaceful galaxy. We could have, Zara agreed. But peace without choice isn't peace. It's just a different kind of prison. The chaos out there. She gestured toward the construction site where a dozen species were arguing about everything from hull plating to cafeteria menus. That beautiful, inefficient, gloriously human chaos, that's what we fought to preserve. Even knowing that some of those choices will be wrong, that people will suffer because of them. Especially then, Zara replied, because the alternative, perfect order imposed from above, isn't humanity. It's something else wearing humanity's face. As if to prove her point, an explosion of rainbow-colored sparks erupted from the station's construction site. Apparently, the Zephyrian art installation had interacted poorly with the Andromedan quantum generators. In any efficiently designed project, such problems would have been anticipated and prevented. But as the construction crews laughed and began working together to clean up the mess, Zara reflected that efficiency wasn't everything. Sometimes the mistakes were what made life interesting. The choice to choose, Alina mused. That's what we really fought for, isn't it? Not any particular outcome, but the right to make our own mistakes. And our own successes, Marcus added. Hard-won, freely chosen, beautifully imperfect successes. Zara nodded, her hand unconsciously moving to her temple where the crown's neural contacts had left faint scars. She would carry those marks for the rest of her life, a reminder of the power she had wielded and willingly given up. In the distance, New Andromeda Station continued its chaotic construction, a monument to the stubborn belief that freedom was worth any price, even the price of imperfection. And across the galaxy, billions of beings made their own choices, wrote their own stories, and shaped their own destinies with all the beautiful, terrible, magnificent randomness that made them truly alive. The dark world was gone, but more importantly, the universe they had tried to order into submission remained defiantly, wonderfully, eternally free. As Zara watched the sparks of a dozen different technologies merge and clash in the void, she smiled and made her own choice, to hope, despite everything, that the chaos would always find a way to surprise her. After all, that was what made it beautiful.